What happens when a U.S. president challenges one of the most powerful and most independent institutions in the world? And what if that challenge doesn't stop at political pressure, public criticism, or campaign rhetoric, but reaches all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States? Right now, America is witnessing a confrontation that could fundamentally reshape the balance of power between the White House, the Federal Reserve, and the highest court in the land. President Donald Trump has launched a renewed and aggressive attack on the Federal Reserve, accusing it of mismanaging interest rates and undermining economic growth. He has openly criticized the Fed's leadership, questioned its independence, and suggested the president should have greater control over monetary policy. But this time, the stakes are higher than ever. Legal challenges tied to presidential authority, regulatory power, and institutional independence are moving closer to the Supreme Court. And if the court takes up these cases, it could be forced to answer a historic question. How independent is the Federal Reserve, really? For decades, the Fed has operated at arm's length from politics. Its independence has been seen as essential to economic stability, inflation control, and global confidence in the US dollar. Markets around the world trust the Federal Reserve precisely because it is insulated from short-term political pressure. But Trump's challenge threatens to upend that long-standing tradition. Supporters argue that an unelected institution should not wield such enormous power without accountability to voters. Critics warn that allowing political control over the Fed could destabilize financial markets, weaken the dollar, and trigger economic chaos far beyond U.S. borders. Now, the Supreme Court may become the final line of defense. If the justices side with expanded presidential authority, the ruling could redefine the limits of executive power and permanently alter the relationship between the presidency and independent agencies. If they defend the Fed's autonomy, they may reinforce one of the most important guardrails in the American economic system. So the big question is this: is the Supreme Court ready to stand up to Donald Trump and protect the independence of America's central bank? Or are we about to witness a seismic shift in how power is divided in the United States? Stay with us, because what's happening now could have massive consequences, not just for the U.S. economy, but for the global financial system itself. To understand why this fight matters, we first need to understand what the Federal Reserve really is and why it exists. The Federal Reserve, often simply called the Fed, is the central bank of the United States. It controls U.S. monetary policy, making decisions that shape the entire economy. The Fed sets interest rates, it manages inflation, and in times of crisis, it steps in to stabilize financial markets and prevent economic collapse. In practical terms, the Federal Reserve influences almost every aspect of daily life, from mortgage rates and credit card interest to business loans, job growth, and even global investment flows. The Fed's decisions ripple through the economy, both at home and abroad. But there's one feature of the Federal Reserve that matters more than all the others: its independence. The Fed was deliberately designed to operate outside of direct political control. Its leaders are appointed, not elected, and once in office, they are shielded from immediate political pressure. This wasn't an accident. It was a lesson learned from history. Time and again, countries that allowed politicians to directly control interest rates paid a heavy price. When elected leaders face political pressure, especially before elections, they are often tempted to lower rates, stimulate short-term growth, and create the illusion of economic strength. The problem is that these decisions can fuel inflation, weaken currencies, and set the stage for long-term economic disaster. That's why the Federal Reserve's independence is not a technical detail or a bureaucratic formality. It is the foundation of economic credibility. Global investors trust the US dollar because they believe monetary policy is guided by data, expertise, and long-term stability, not political ambition. The trust keeps borrowing costs lower, strengthens financial markets, and reinforces America's role at the center of the global financial system. If that independence is weakened, the consequences could extend far beyond Washington. It could shake confidence in the dollar, it could disrupt global markets, and it could alter how the world views the United States as an economic leader. This is why the current fight over the Federal Reserve is about more than personalities or politics. It's about whether one of the most important pillars of the global financial system can remain independent, or whether it will be pulled into the political arena with consequences that could last for decades. Donald Trump's conflict with the Federal Reserve is not new. During his presidency, Trump repeatedly attacked Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, a man he himself appointed. He accused the Fed of keeping interest rates too high, slowing economic growth and undermining his economic agenda. Again and again, Trump publicly expressed frustration with the central bank, breaking long-standing norms that presidents do not interfere with monetary policy. Trump argued that the president should have greater control over interest rates and monetary decisions. In his view, the Federal Reserve was acting against the interests of American workers and businesses. At the time, many observers dismissed these attacks as political rhetoric, blunt talk aimed at energizing supporters rather than signaling real institutional change. But now Trump's approach has escalated. This time, it's not just words, it's legal action. Trump has moved to remove a sitting Federal Reserve governor, claiming that the president has the constitutional authority to fire Fed officials at will. His argument challenges decades of legal precedent that protects independent agencies from direct political dismissal. This move is unprecedented. No modern president has attempted to remove a Federal Reserve governor simply over policy disagreements. And the moment this effort became public, it triggered an immediate legal firestorm. Legal scholars, economists, and former central bank officials warned that such an action could strike at the heart of the Fed's independence. Lawsuits were quickly filed, arguing that allowing a president to fire Fed leaders would expose monetary policy to political pressure and undermine financial stability. Supporters of Trump, however, see the issue differently. They argue that unelected officials should not wield enormous economic power without accountability. In their view, the president, elected by the people, should have the final say over institutions that shape the nation's economic future. The courts are now being asked to decide where that line is drawn. Is the Federal Reserve truly independent, protected from political retaliation? Or does the president have sweeping authority to remove its leaders? The answers to those questions could redefine the balance of power between the White House and America's central bank. And as the legal battle moves forward, all eyes are turning to one place: the Supreme Court, because what happens next may not only determine the fate of one Fed official, but the future of monetary independence in the United States. At the center of this legal battle is a critical constitutional question. Can a U.S. president remove a Federal Reserve governor without cause? Lower courts have already blocked Trump's attempt. Judges ruled that Federal Reserve governors are protected by law and can only be removed for cause, such as misconduct or incapacity, not political disagreement. Trump's legal team argues something far more radical, that the president has broad executive authority to remove officials in independent agencies, including the Fed. If the Supreme Court agrees with Trump, it would mark a dramatic expansion of presidential power. And that's why this case matters far beyond one individual. When the case reached the Supreme Court, legal observers expected a deeply ideological battle. After all, the court currently has a conservative majority, several justices appointed by Trump himself. But something unexpected happened. During oral arguments, justices from across the ideological spectrum expressed concern. Concern not just about legality, but about consequences. Some conservative justices openly questioned whether allowing a president to fire Fed officials at will would destroy the independence of the central bank. One justice warned that such power could allow any president to run roughshod over monetary policy. Another suggested that the Federal Reserve is fundamentally different from other executive agencies, precisely because its independence is essential to economic stability. These are not casual comments. They are warning flares. The Supreme Court now faces a dilemma. On one hand, the court has recently expanded presidential authority in several major rulings. On the other hand, granting Trump this power could set a precedent that future presidents, Republican or Democrat, could exploit. Imagine a future where every new president fires Fed officials who disagree with them. Interest rates could become a political weapon. Markets could lose confidence. Foreign investors could pull back. The US dollar's global dominance could weaken. This is not theoretical. Central bank independence has collapsed in countries before, and the results are often inflation, currency crises, and economic instability. The justices know this, and that's why many analysts believe the court may draw a rare line here. This fight is not just about America. The Federal Reserve is the most powerful central bank on earth. When the Fed raises or cuts interest rates, global markets move. Developing countries feel it. Currencies react. Stock markets respond. If the Fed is seen as politically compromised, global trust in the US financial system could erode. That's why international investors, foreign governments, and central banks around the world are watching this case closely. The outcome could redefine how independent the Fed truly is, or whether it becomes another political institution. So what happens next? Most legal experts expect the Supreme Court to take a narrow approach. Rather than issuing a sweeping ruling on presidential power, the court may block Trump's action on procedural grounds, reinforce for cause protections for Fed governors, avoid rewriting the balance of power altogether. In other words, the court may quietly but firmly stop this move without igniting a constitutional earthquake. That in itself would be a powerful message. The big question: so, is the Supreme Court ready to stand up to Trump over his attack on the Federal Reserve? All signs suggest yes, cautiously. Not because the court wants to oppose Trump politically, but because the stakes are too high. This case is about the credibility of American institutions, about economic stability, and about whether any president should control the financial engine of the world's largest economy. Whatever the final ruling, one thing is clear. This battle has exposed just how fragile institutional independence can be, even in the United States. And the outcome will echo far beyond Washington. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dive analysis on global politics, geopolitics, and current affairs. Let us know in the comments. Should the president have more control over the Federal Reserve, or should the Fed remain fully independent? Thanks for watching.